Picture this. You wake up one morning to discover that some of the most powerful industrial facilities on the planet, operations that have been running without interruption for more than a century, are quietly shutting their doors and relocating. Not because of conflict, not because of some natural catastrophe, but simply because continuing to operate in place has become financially unsustainable, administratively overwhelming, and strategically dangerous. That is precisely what is unfolding right now in Germany, one of the most formidable industrial nations in human history. And the country that is steadily absorbing all of that displaced manufacturing capacity? Australia. Yes, Australia, a place most people associate with surf, wildlife, and open skies, is now capturing tens of billions of dollars in German industrial investment. The chain of events that led here represents one of the most consequential economic pivots of our lifetime. Stay with me, because by the time this video ends, you'll never look at the global economy the same way again. Welcome back to My Future Trend, the channel dedicated to unpacking the biggest economic and industrial developments unfolding across the world right now, so you can actually grasp what they mean for the future, yours included. If you're new here, hit subscribe and give this video a like, because we put serious research into stories that most other channels haven't even noticed yet. All right, let's get into it. To fully appreciate why Germany's industrial foundation is crumbling, you first need to understand just how dominant and deeply entrenched it really is. Germany is not simply another European nation with a manufacturing sector. It is the industrial heartbeat of the entire European continent. It is home to Volkswagen, BMW, BASF, Siemens, ThyssenKrupp, and Bayer, companies that are not merely large, but historically transformative. They have defined entire industries across generations. German engineering has carried a reputation for precision and excellence for well over 100 years. The phrase "made in Germany" has long functioned as a global stamp of trust, recognized by consumers and businesses on every continent. So when we say that this industrial legacy is now fracturing, we are describing something that would have seemed utterly unthinkable just a decade ago. But the reality is stark. Germany is now confronting what economists are describing as its most severe industrial crisis since the Second World War. The figures are hard to absorb. We are looking at an industrial contraction exceeding $200 billion. Factory output is declining. Major corporations are announcing mass layoffs and facility shutdowns. Capital investment is evaporating. And most critically, companies are not merely scaling back inside Germany. They are physically relocating production to other countries. Australia is increasingly among them. But before we get to Australia, we need to understand the three enormous pressures driving this collapse inside Germany, because this is where the story truly gets interesting. The first, and arguably the most painful, is energy. Germany made a decision that appeared principled and forward-thinking at the time. It committed to phasing out both nuclear power and coal as part of a broader clean energy agenda. The intention was to bridge toward wind and solar. But in the interim, Germany became deeply dependent on inexpensive natural gas imported from Russia. For years, that Russian gas kept German factories operating efficiently and at a globally competitive cost. Then came the war in Ukraine, and the situation changed with breathtaking speed. Russia restricted or cut off natural gas supplies to Europe, and Germany absorbed the impact harder than almost any other nation. Energy prices didn't inch upward, they detonated. Industrial electricity costs in Germany shot to among the highest in the entire developed world. For facilities running around the clock and consuming energy at industrial scale, this wasn't a setback, it was a survival crisis. Businesses that had operated profitably for decades suddenly found themselves hemorrhaging money simply from the cost of keeping machines running. The second force is Germany's regulatory and bureaucratic environment. Regulations matter. No one is suggesting that factories should be allowed to contaminate waterways or cut corners on worker safety. But Germany's regulatory architecture has grown so layered, so tangled, and so glacially slow that it is actively suffocating business activity. Want to construct a new manufacturing facility in Germany? Expect to spend between 5 and 10 years just clearing the permitting process. Want to expand an existing plant? Prepare to navigate dozens of overlapping government bodies, mandatory environmental assessments, and legal challenges that can drag on indefinitely. German business leaders have been raising the alarm on this for years. The system has become so impenetrable that even domestic companies that genuinely want to invest inside Germany frequently give up and redirect their capital elsewhere. When it takes longer to obtain a construction permit than it does to actually build the factory, something has gone fundamentally wrong. The third force is labor costs and the demographic squeeze. German workers are among the most highly skilled on earth and fully deserve strong compensation. But wages, when stacked on top of soaring energy costs and compliance expenses, have made the total cost of operating a German factory extraordinarily difficult to justify. And layered on top of that is the demographic reality. Germany has an aging population, and there are simply not enough young skilled workers entering the labor market to replace the ones retiring. This is producing shortages in key industrial sectors, which pushes wages higher still and introduces unpredictability into production timelines. Combine all three, the energy catastrophe, the regulatory gridlock, and the labor cost and supply problem, and you get a compounding crisis that is pushing investment and production out of Germany at a pace that is alarming even to seasoned economists. Now let's talk about the companies that are actually moving, because this is where the numbers become concrete. Volkswagen, one of Germany's most iconic brands, has entered full crisis management. The company announced plans to close multiple factories on German soil, the first domestic closures in its entire corporate history. Thousands of jobs hang in the balance. BASF, the world's largest chemical company and a German institution, has announced billions of euros in cost reductions and has been redirecting production capacity to facilities in China and the United States. ThyssenKrupp, the colossal steel and engineering conglomerate, has been divesting divisions and cutting tens of thousands of positions. Even Siemens, a name that has been virtually synonymous with German industrial engineering, has been restructuring and shifting more operations toward lower cost, more business-friendly locations. These are not peripheral firms making minor strategic tweaks. These are the structural pillars of the German economy, and they are all retreating simultaneously. So now the central question, why Australia? When most people picture German manufacturers relocating, they instinctively picture Vietnam, Mexico, or Eastern Europe, places where labor is inexpensive and regulatory oversight is limited. So what is Australia, a high-wage, heavily regulated Western nation, doing attracting this caliber of investment? The answer is genuinely compelling, and it hinges on a combination of advantages that Australia holds in a way that almost nowhere else on Earth can currently match. The first and most decisive factor is resources. Australia is among the most mineral-rich nations on the planet. It holds vast reserves of iron ore, lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements. Why does that matter so urgently right now? Because the global economy is in the midst of a colossal energy transition. Electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, grid-scale battery storage, all of these technologies demand enormous quantities of critical minerals, and Australia has them in extraordinary abundance. German industrial companies, particularly in automotive, energy, and advanced manufacturing, are urgently seeking secure, politically stable, reliable sources for these materials. Australia satisfies every one of those criteria. You are not sourcing materials from a country that might abruptly change its policies or cut off supply for geopolitical reasons. You are dealing with a stable democracy operating under a transparent legal framework and consistent institutional rules. The second factor is energy, and there is something almost ironic about this, given that energy collapse is what is crippling Germany. Australia is rapidly emerging as a global leader in renewable energy generation. Its geography, the intensity of its sunlight, the length of its coastlines, the scale of its open land, gives it the capacity to generate near-limitless clean energy at exceptionally low cost. Substantial investment is already flowing into green hydrogen projects across Australia, where renewable electricity is used to produce hydrogen fuel for industrial applications and export. For German manufacturers, particularly in chemicals and steel, access to affordable, clean, reliable energy is the single most critical factor they are evaluating. Australia, unlike Germany, actually has it. The third factor is institutional stability. The world has become a far more volatile and uncertain place. Supply chains have been ruptured by pandemics, wars, and escalating geopolitical friction. Companies are no longer solely asking where manufacturing is cheapest. They are asking where it is safest and most dependable. Australia offers a stable government, a transparent judiciary, robust property rights protections, and an unbroken record of honoring trade commitments and international obligations. For a German company that has just watched its supply chain dismantled by a war in Eastern Europe and rising uncertainty around China, the prospect of operating in Australia carries a powerful sense of security. The fourth factor is trade positioning and strategic alignment. Australia has been aggressively expanding its trade relationships, building economic partnerships across both Asian markets and Western allies. The free trade agreement between Australia and the European Union has been advancing steadily toward finalization. As it nears completion, it makes Australia an even more strategically valuable manufacturing base for European companies. You can produce in Australia and access both Asian and European markets under preferential trade terms. That is an exceptionally powerful proposition. Now let's look at what this actually looks like in practice, because this is not hypothetical. In the mining and minerals processing space, major joint ventures have been established to process critical minerals within Australia, rather than exporting raw materials for processing elsewhere. Germany and Australia signed a bilateral hydrogen partnership agreement worth billions of dollars. designed to eventually deliver green hydrogen produced in Australia to German industrial consumers. The German government itself, despite being consumed by its domestic crisis, has been actively negotiating with Canberra to secure future supply chain stability for the energy transition. Companies like Fortescue, one of Australia's largest mining operations, have been forming partnerships with European industrial players to co-develop green energy and green manufacturing projects. The state of Western Australia in particular has been positioning itself as an international hub for critical minerals processing and clean manufacturing, and it has been conducting an aggressive and targeted campaign for European investment. What is especially significant here at My Future Trend is that we are not simply watching a shift in where things are produced. We are watching the entire logic of global manufacturing being rewritten. For decades, the formula was straightforward: move production to wherever labor costs were lowest. That is what drove the mass migration of manufacturing to China and Southeast Asia. But that model is disintegrating. Labor costs across much of the developing world are climbing. Shipping costs have grown more volatile and unpredictable. Geopolitical risk has made many traditionally low-cost manufacturing locations feel genuinely unreliable, and the raw materials required for the clean energy economy are not evenly distributed. They are concentrated in specific places. So companies are pivoting toward what economists are now calling friendshoring, repositioning supply chains within countries that are politically compatible, economically stable, and strategically aligned with their own values and long-term interests. Australia fits this emerging framework almost perfectly. And Germany, because of the severity of its crisis, is being compelled to adapt more rapidly than virtually any other industrial nation. There is also a deeply human dimension embedded within all of these economic statistics, and it deserves acknowledgement. In Germany, communities whose entire social identity has been built around manufacturing for multiple generations are facing a profoundly uncertain future. Wolfsburg, the city constructed around Volkswagen's headquarters and production complex, is watching its economic bedrock tremble. Workers who anticipated lifelong careers at companies their parents and grandparents also served are confronting sudden layoffs and plant closures. The anger is real, the anxiety is real, and the political consequences are real. Germany's political landscape has already begun to shift in response, with voters channeling deep frustration at governments they believe have failed to protect the industrial base that generated national prosperity. On the opposite side of the planet, a different kind of transformation is unfolding. New industrial corridors are being mapped out across Australia. Investment is arriving in regions previously defined only by agriculture or resource extraction. Young Australians are being recruited and trained for advanced manufacturing and clean energy roles that had no equivalent in their country 5 years ago. Australia is quietly, but with growing confidence, stepping into a new and consequential role in the world economy. It is also worth stepping back to consider what this signals for the global economy as a whole, because the implications extend well beyond Germany and Australia. We are witnessing a fundamental reorganization of where wealth is generated and where industrial power is concentrated. Throughout most of the 20th century, that power resided in Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Then China's rise redirected enormous volumes of manufacturing to Asia. Now we are entering a third phase, one in which the demands of the clean energy transition, combined with geopolitical realignment and resource geography, are directing industrial investment toward resource-rich, politically stable nations in the Southern Hemisphere. Australia is the most visible example of this shift, but similar dynamics are emerging in Canada, Chile, and parts of Southern Africa. The nations that control critical minerals and hold renewable energy potential are going to wield extraordinary economic influence in the decades ahead. And they are only beginning to recognize the scale of that power. For investors, for businesses, and for young people mapping out where the real opportunities of the next generation will emerge, this is one of the most consequential trends in motion right now. The conventional assumptions about which countries are wealthy and which are developing are being turned upside down. Germany's crisis does not mark the end of Germany. German engineering expertise and institutional knowledge remain enormously valuable on the world stage. But the physical infrastructure of production, the factories, processing facilities, and industrial plant, that is relocating, and Australia is among the foremost beneficiaries of where it is going. The nations that recognize this transition early and position themselves deliberately are going to occupy a position of remarkable strength over the next 2 to 3 decades. So what should you carry away from all of this? Germany's industrial collapse is real. It is happening now, driven by an energy crisis, regulatory paralysis, and demographic pressure that has been compounding for years. Australia's emergence as a major destination for industrial investment is equally real, driven by its exceptional combination of critical mineral wealth, renewable energy capacity, political stability, and strategic trade positioning. The global manufacturing map is being redrawn, and the rules that governed where things were made for the past half-century no longer apply. This is the kind of economic transformation that arrives once in a generation, and we are living through it right now. If this video reshaped the way you see the global economy, do us a favor and drop a comment below. Tell us what you think. Can Australia genuinely evolve into a major global manufacturing hub? Do you believe Germany has the capacity to turn this around? We genuinely want to hear your perspective. And your comments make a real difference to how this channel grows. If you know someone who would find this story worth watching, please share it with them right now. Every share extends My Future Trends reach to more people who deserve to understand what is actually happening in the world economy. And if you have not yet subscribed and turned on notifications, do it now, because we are constantly researching and releasing stories exactly like this one. The world is shifting faster than most people realize, and we are here to make sure you are always ahead of it.